Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on Kiribati. It's a place completely defined by staggering contrasts. We've got rich history, vital global importance, and some really urgent modern challenges to unpack. I'm thrilled to guide you through this, so let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. First up, an invisible ocean empire. Second, navigators, myths, and spirits. Third, empires, whalers, and war. Fourth, the road to independence. Fifth, the modern economic struggle. And finally, the rising tide. Okay, let's dive into this sweeping narrative, going all the way from ancient spiritual migrations to the modern existential threat of a changing climate.
Section 1. An invisible ocean empire. A geographic paradox.
When we zoom out to view Kiribati on a macro scale, we hit this massive paradox. Think about these numbers for a second. Kiribati has just 811 square kilometers of total land area. It's practically invisible on a globe. Yet it commands an exclusive economic zone of 5 million square kilometers. That is an ocean territory larger than a lot of continents, and it completely dominates the Central Pacific.
Breaking that geographical footprint down further, we're talking about 33 coral reef islands. This territory is so expansive that it literally straddles both the equator and the international dateline, divided into the Gilbert, Phoenix, and Line Islands. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that the highest elevation is less than 5 meters above sea level. So these tiny specks of sand and reef are quite literally the first places on Earth to greet the new day.
Section 2. Navigators, myths, and spirits. The human element. The human story here is built on 3 incredible waves of ancient Polynesian navigation. Settlers first showed up around 2000 BC, likely making the journey from Samoa. Then, around AD 400, a second wave arrived from the Marquesas Islands. Finally, between the 1300s and 1500s, a third wave made it over from the Society and Hawaiian Islands. It's a true marvel of ancient maritime skill.
Once settled, they built their communities around physical structures that deeply grounded their spiritual practices. The core of this is the mare, a ceremonial platform traditionally built from coral blocks. Every inhabited island has one. It's essentially the anchor of the community, serving as a sacred place of worship and a central meeting ground, all led by designated priests holding highly specific traditional roles.
Beyond the physical structures, their belief system was incredibly vivid. They believed in mangrove spirits, Echukoro for the men, Meru for the women, who possessed great powers to protect the islands. And get this, they had ceremonial chants that were said to be gifted from the sun god to parasitic worms that then birthed sharks. Seriously, these fascinating beliefs really showcase an ecosystem where the land, the sea, and the divine were completely inseparable.
Section 3. Empires, whalers, and war. Colliding worlds.
So we have to ask, how exactly does an isolated ocean paradise turn into a brutal global battlefield? Well, in just a few short decades, Kiribati got violently thrust right onto the world stage. These global collisions happened in successive waves. Spanish explorers mapped the eastern islands back in 1568. By the 1830s, the first wave of commercial whalers started rolling in, bringing dramatic economic and social shifts. That eventually culminated in 1892 when the British stepped in and declared a protectorate. But the absolute breaking point came in 1941 with the Japanese occupation. Between the trade, the guns, and the colonial powers, their traditional way of life was heavily disrupted well before World War II even broke out.
76. That number is just staggering. The Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 lasted exactly 76 horrific hours. It was one of the most concentrated, devastating conflicts of the entire Pacific War. We're talking almost 6,500 U.S. Marines and soldiers launching a massive amphibious assault. Before they even landed, ferocious naval and aerial bombardments pounded the islands almost to dust. The geography was actually so difficult that American tanks were just sinking directly into the sand on the beaches. Thousands of casualties across both American and Japanese forces in just 3 days. Tarawa was completely leveled, and to this day you can still see rusted machinery scattered across the landscape.
Section 4. The road to independence. Forging a nation. Moving out of the crucible of war, the transition to autonomy happened in 3 major steps. Step 1 began in 1966 with a major push for an elected legislative council to give the people a voice. Step 2 came over a decade later in 1978 when the British Parliament finally passed the Kiribati Independence Bill. And step 3, in 1979, the Sovereign Republic of Kiribati was officially formed. Getting there meant navigating some seriously entrenched British colonial administration and a lot of intense internal debate.
Look, independence definitely didn't mean instant stability. Early on, the nation dealt with massive challenges, including a 7-year period of one-party rule. That descent eventually boiled over into a violent 1985 parliament occupation, which only ended when police stormed the building using tear gas and riot gear. The political reality was incredibly turbulent, which really highlights just how difficult it is to build a modern state in extreme geographic isolation.
Section 5. The Modern Economic Struggle, Surviving on the Edge.
The economic reality today is jarring, especially regarding domestic food production. By 2013, domestic production made up only 14% of their food supply. The other 86%, all imported. Wait, to put that into perspective, back in 1980, they were producing over 60% locally. This massive shift to imported, often poorer quality food is directly driving a massive national health crisis right now, including really high rates of diabetes and heart disease.
The broader economic picture is just as fragile. They're heavily reliant on foreign aid and remittances. Their main historical resource, phosphate reserves, are completely mined out. Local fishing struggles to compete with massive Asian imports, and tourism, it makes up barely 0.8% of their GDP. They only get roughly 4,000 visitors a year. With infrastructure limits and high transport costs, the nation is constantly fighting to find innovative, sustainable ways to survive economically.
Section 6. The Rising Tide, an Existential Threat.
But the ultimate threat looming over all of this is the climate. By 2100, we're looking at a projected warming of 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. They are already dealing with seawater pushing into their vital freshwater aquifers, making the water too salty to drink. Coastal erosion is literally wiping away entire villages, rendering them uninhabitable. Plus, the lagoon reef ecosystems and fisheries are taking a huge hit. It's a brutal reality. A nation that contributes almost nothing to global emissions is suffering the immediate, cascading consequences of a warming planet.
It creates an agonizing reality on the ground. Observers have literally noted, and I quote, "The islands of Kiribati are littered with the abandoned villages and pits of collapsed coconut trees." The ocean is actively taking the land back, piece by piece, forcing people to either adapt or retreat from homes their families have lived in for generations.
But they absolutely refuse to give up. They are pushing back hard through the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Their focus right now is heavily on education, preserving their unique culture, and building climate resilience. Despite these monumental challenges, the people of Kiribati are fiercely dedicated to protecting their Gilbertese legacy and pushing for global cooperation. So what does this all mean? Will the world just let this incredible, unique cultural heritage sink beneath the waves? Or will we actually take action to turn the tide? As we wrap up this explainer, it's a question we have to ask ourselves. What responsibility does the global community have to make sure Kiribati's rich history, its resilient people, and its culture aren't lost to the ocean forever? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.